Your husband is living a double life, and the woman with dark hair will destroy everything you have built together." Those were the exact words Madame Celeste spoke to me in her small shop on Bleecker Street in Manhattan, delivered with the kind of certainty that made my skin crawl. I had laughed it off as typical fortune-teller nonsense, paid my $50, and walked away convinced I had wasted money on entertainment. What I discovered 6 months later, hidden in a safety deposit box I never knew existed, would prove that every impossible word she spoke was not only true, but represented a betrayal so calculated and comprehensive that it would reshape my understanding of the man I had shared my life with for 8 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the Chase Bank branch on East 42nd Street hummed with that particular frequency that seemed designed to amplify anxiety. I sat across from account manager Jennifer Walsh, watching her review documents with the methodical precision of someone who delivered devastating financial news to unsuspecting clients on a regular basis. Her assistant, David Chen, sat beside her organizing paperwork, while bank supervisor Maria Santos reviewed what I assumed were the final details of my complete financial devastation. "Mrs. Catherine Reeves," Jennifer began, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of institutional authority, "I need to inform you that your joint accounts with Mr. Michael Reeves have been closed, and the funds transferred to accounts that were established without your knowledge or authorization." Those words landed in the sterile bank conference room like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of disbelief that seemed to expand beyond the walls and into every corner of my carefully constructed life. At 34 years old, I had just discovered that my husband of 8 years had systematically stolen our entire savings, liquidated our investment portfolio, and somehow gained access to funds I had inherited from my grandmother's estate 3 years earlier. My name is Catherine Reeves, and until that moment in Midtown Manhattan, I had been living what I considered a successful marriage with a man I trusted completely. What Jennifer, David, and Maria did not understand was that during the past 6 months, ever since that strange encounter with Madame Celeste, I had been experiencing a series of increasingly disturbing coincidences that had led me to conduct my own careful investigation into my husband's activities. The irony of my situation was not lost on me as I sat in that sterile conference room, surrounded by people who were about to confirm that every rational instinct I possessed had been completely wrong about the person closest to me. My parents had raised me to value logic, evidence, and practical decision-making above intuition or supernatural beliefs. They had taught me that successful relationships required trust, communication, and shared commitment to mutual goals rather than suspicion or paranoia about hidden motives. When I first met Michael Reeves at a networking event for financial professionals in Boston, I believed I had found someone who shared my values and approached life with the same commitment to honesty and transparency that had guided my own decisions. He was a senior analyst at Meridian Investment Partners, specializing in portfolio management for high-net-worth clients throughout New England. His professional reputation was impeccable, his references were outstanding, and his approach to our relationship seemed refreshingly straightforward and genuine. During our 3-year courtship, Michael demonstrated exactly the type of character and reliability I had hoped to find in a life partner. He was attentive without being possessive, ambitious without being ruthless, and financially responsible without being obsessive about money. Our conversations about marriage, career goals, and long-term planning revealed what appeared to be complete alignment on fundamental values and practical objectives. When we married in September 2016 at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, surrounded by friends and family who unanimously approved of our partnership, I felt confident that I had made an intelligent decision based on careful evaluation and genuine compatibility. Michael's parents, Robert and Eleanor Reeves, had welcomed me into their family with warmth and enthusiasm, while my own parents, Dr. James Morrison and Professor Linda Morrison, had expressed satisfaction that I had found someone who appreciated my professional accomplishments and supported my career ambitions. The first 5 years of our marriage reinforced these positive impressions. Michael received consistent promotions and salary increases that reflected his growing expertise in financial analysis and client relationship management. I advanced from junior associate to senior partner at Morrison & Associates, the boutique consulting firm my father had established 20 years earlier, specializing in organizational development and strategic planning for technology companies. Our combined income allowed us to purchase a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, establish substantial savings accounts, and begin building the type of investment portfolio that would support our long-term goals for financial independence and eventual family expansion. We traveled extensively, entertained frequently, and maintained what appeared to be the kind of balanced, successful partnership that served as an example to our friends and colleagues. The subtle changes in Michael's behavior began approximately 18 months ago, though I initially attributed them to work stress and the natural evolution that occurs in any long-term relationship. He became more secretive about his phone conversations, more evasive about his schedule, and more defensive when I asked routine questions about his day or his client meetings. "Catherine, you seem more anxious lately," he would say when I mentioned feeling disconnected from his professional activities. "I think the pressure from your father's business expansion is making you more sensitive to normal workplace confidentiality requirements." These explanations seemed reasonable at the time, particularly given that Morrison & Associates was indeed undergoing significant growth that required my increased attention and longer working hours. I accepted Michael's assertion that his discretion about client information reflected professional ethics rather than personal secrecy, and I convinced myself that my concerns reflected my own stress rather than legitimate reasons for suspicion. The turning point came 6 months ago during what was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway to Manhattan. Michael had surprised me with reservations at the St. Regis Hotel and tickets to a Broadway show, explaining that he wanted to celebrate our recent professional achievements and reconnect after several months of demanding work schedules. On Saturday afternoon, while Michael attended what he described as a brief client meeting, I decided to explore the village and indulge in the type of spontaneous urban adventure that had attracted me to New York during my college years. Walking through the narrow streets near Washington Square Park, I noticed a small storefront with a hand-painted sign that read Madame Celeste, Psychic Readings and Spiritual Guidance. I had never consulted a fortune teller or shown any interest in supernatural predictions, but something about the modest shop and the elderly woman visible through the window compelled me to enter. Perhaps it was curiosity about experiences outside my usual rational framework, or perhaps it was an unconscious desire to seek perspective on the subtle anxieties I had been experiencing about my marriage. Madame Celeste appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate bun and clothing that suggested European origins and decades of experience in her unusual profession. Her small shop was filled with crystals, candles, and books about astrology and tarot card reading, but her manner was surprisingly practical and businesslike, rather than theatrical or mystical. "You are seeking clarity about someone close to you," she said after I had explained that I was simply curious about psychic readings and had no specific questions or concerns. I nodded, feeling slightly foolish but increasingly intrigued by her direct approach. "I suppose I am wondering about my marriage and whether my husband and I are as compatible as I believe we are." Madame Celeste studied my face with intensity that made me uncomfortable, then reached for a deck of tarot cards that appeared well used and carefully maintained. She shuffled them slowly while maintaining eye contact that seemed to penetrate beyond conventional social interaction. "Your husband is living a double life," she said with absolute certainty, laying cards on the small table between us. "He has been deceiving you for more than 2 years, and there is another woman involved. She has dark hair and works in his professional environment. Together, they have been systematically stealing money that belongs to you." The specificity of these claims was startling, particularly given that I had provided no information about Michael's profession or our financial situation. I felt my rational mind rejecting these assertions while simultaneously experiencing physical discomfort that suggested some unconscious recognition of their potential validity. "That seems impossible," I replied, attempting to maintain polite skepticism while processing the emotional impact of her words. "My husband is extremely ethical in his professional life, and our marriage has been built on trust and mutual respect." Madame Celeste continued laying cards with methodical precision, pausing occasionally to study the patterns they created. "The betrayal is more extensive than you realize. He has been planning to leave you once he has transferred enough assets to ensure his security with this other woman. You will discover evidence within 6 months that will confirm everything I am telling you now." She looked at me with an expression that combined sympathy with determination. "You must begin paying attention to details you have been ignoring. Check financial records you do not normally review. Notice changes in his routine that seem insignificant. Trust your instincts when they tell you something is not as it appears." I paid the $50 fee and left the shop feeling disturbed and confused rather than entertained or enlightened. The rational part of my mind dismissed her predictions as generic statements that could apply to many marriages, while the emotional part of me struggled with anxiety that seemed disproportionate to what should have been an amusing diversion. During the remainder of our weekend in Manhattan, I found myself observing Michael's behavior with new attention to subtle details I had previously overlooked. His phone conversations seemed more guarded than necessary. His explanations for client meetings contained fewer specific details than usual, and his affection toward me felt slightly performative rather than spontaneous. When we returned to Brooklyn, I began conducting discreet research into our financial accounts and investment portfolios, initially to reassure myself that Madame Celeste's predictions were unfounded nonsense. What I discovered during the following weeks was a pattern of small discrepancies and unauthorized transactions that individually seemed insignificant but collectively suggested systematic deception. Our joint savings account showed regular transfers to accounts I did not recognize, our investment portfolio contained positions I had never approved, and several credit cards had been opened in my name without my knowledge or consent. Each discovery required careful investigation to avoid alerting Michael to my growing suspicions, while gathering evidence that could either confirm or refute the disturbing picture that was emerging. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most shocking revelation came 3 months ago, when I discovered that Michael had established a safety deposit box at a Chase Bank branch in Midtown Manhattan, using documentation that included forged signatures and false information about our joint assets. The box was registered under both of our names, but I had never been informed of its existence or provided with access information. Gaining access to this safety deposit box required legal documentation and formal identification procedures that took several weeks to complete. During this time, I maintained normal routines and interactions with Michael, while privately preparing for discoveries that might fundamentally alter our relationship and my understanding of the man I had married. The contents of the safety deposit box exceeded my most pessimistic expectations. Along with cash, jewelry, and investment certificates that represented systematic theft from our joint accounts, I found detailed documentation of Michael's relationship with Sarah Chen, a portfolio manager at his firm who matched Madame Celeste's description of the dark-haired woman who would destroy everything I had built. The documentation included romantic correspondence, photographs, travel records, and financial planning documents that revealed a comprehensive plan to liquidate our shared assets and establish new accounts accessible only to Michael and Sarah. They had been conducting their relationship for more than 3 years, overlapping with some of our happiest periods as a married couple, and their plans included relocating to Singapore, where Michael had been offered a position with Sarah's family's investment firm. The most devastating aspect of this discovery was the evidence that Michael had been systematically transferring funds from my grandmother's inheritance, money that held deep emotional significance beyond its substantial financial value. My grandmother had specifically designated this inheritance to support my professional independence and future family plans, viewing it as her contribution to my ability to make life choices based on personal values rather than financial constraints. Michael had been accessing these funds through legal maneuvers that exploited our joint account structures and his detailed knowledge of my financial habits and decision-making patterns. He had essentially been financing his escape from our marriage using money that represented my grandmother's love and support for my autonomous future. As I sat in that bank conference room, listening to Jennifer Walsh explain the technical details of how someone could systematically steal from accounts they had legitimate access to, I felt the profound satisfaction of validation mixed with the devastating recognition that every aspect of my marriage had been built on comprehensive deception. The evidence I had gathered over 6 months of careful investigation proved that Madame Celeste's seemingly impossible predictions had been accurate in every specific detail. Michael was indeed living a double life. Sarah Chen was the dark-haired woman who had helped him plan the destruction of our partnership, and their systematic theft had been occurring for exactly the time frame she had specified. But what Jennifer, David, and Maria did not understand was that my investigation had uncovered far more than financial theft. I had documented evidence of mail fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and securities violations that represented federal crimes with serious legal consequences. Michael and Sarah had not simply betrayed a marriage. They had committed systematic financial fraud that would ultimately destroy their carefully planned escape to Singapore and their dreams of building a new life together on money they had stolen from me. The USB drive in my purse contained comprehensive documentation that would not only recover the stolen assets, but would result in criminal charges that would end both of their careers and potentially lead to significant prison sentences. Michael's arrogance and assumption that I would never investigate his activities had led him to maintain detailed records that would serve as evidence of his own crimes. As Jennifer prepared to explain the legal procedures for reporting financial fraud and recovering stolen assets, I reached into my purse and retrieved the small USB drive that contained 6 months of meticulous investigation. The weight of it felt simultaneously insignificant and transformative, representing hundreds of hours of careful detective work that had validated supernatural predictions, while exposing betrayal so comprehensive that it would reshape everything Michael and Sarah thought they knew about the consequences of systematic deception. The moment had arrived to reveal the evidence that would prove Madame Celeste's impossible predictions had been entirely accurate, and that the woman they had dismissed as a naive and trusting wife had been quietly building a case that would destroy their carefully constructed plans and hold them accountable for every dollar they had stolen and every lie they had told. The fortune teller's warning had seemed crazy until I found the evidence. Now that evidence was about to transform apparent defeat into comprehensive victory and ultimate justice. To understand the magnitude of betrayal that was about to unfold in that Chase Bank conference room, it becomes essential to examine the systematic pattern of deception that had characterized my marriage to Michael Reeves for more than 3 years. This was not a story of sudden marital breakdown or dramatic relationship conflict, but rather the gradual accumulation of small lies, carefully constructed alibis, and sophisticated emotional manipulation that had shaped every aspect of our shared life, while I remained completely unaware of the elaborate fiction he had been maintaining. My journey into marriage with Michael began with genuine confidence in my ability to evaluate character and make sound decisions about long-term partnerships. During my graduate studies at Columbia Business School, where I earned my MBA with concentrations in organizational psychology and strategic management, I had researched relationship dynamics extensively and believed I understood the warning signs of deception, manipulation, and emotional unavailability that could undermine successful partnerships. Michael Reeves appeared to represent everything I had identified as desirable in a life partner. During our initial meeting at the New England Financial Professionals Conference in Boston, he demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of investment strategies, impressive emotional intelligence in navigating complex social situations, and apparent commitment to the type of ethical business practices that had guided my own professional development. Our early conversations revealed what seemed to be remarkable compatibility in fundamental values and life objectives. Michael spoke enthusiastically about building a partnership based on mutual respect, shared financial goals, and complementary professional ambitions. He expressed admiration for my academic achievements and consulting work, suggesting that he valued intellectual accomplishment and independent career success in potential partners, rather than seeking someone who would subordinate their professional identity to traditional domestic expectations. The courtship process reinforced these positive impressions through consistent behavior that demonstrated reliability, thoughtfulness, and genuine interest in building a meaningful long-term relationship, rather than pursuing casual romantic involvement. Michael remembered details about my work projects and family relationships, offered practical support during stressful periods, and integrated me into his social and professional networks in ways that suggested serious commitment to our partnership. His family background seemed stable and supportive, providing additional evidence of his character and values. Robert Reeves had built a successful accounting practice serving small businesses throughout Massachusetts, while Eleanor Reeves had balanced raising 3 children with part-time work as a high school mathematics teacher. Their marriage appeared to exemplify the type of balanced partnership I hoped to create, based on mutual support, shared responsibilities, and maintained individual identities within a committed relationship. Michael's professional trajectory at Meridian Investment Partners reflected steady advancement based on technical competence and client relationship skills that suggested both intellectual capability and ethical integrity. His supervisors consistently rated his performance as exceptional, his clients expressed high levels of satisfaction with his analytical abilities and communication skills, and his colleagues regarded him as reliable and collaborative, rather than competitive or manipulative. The wedding planning process provided numerous opportunities to observe Michael's character under pressure, and his behavior during these potentially stressful months continued to reinforce my confidence in our compatibility. He participated actively in decision-making without attempting to dominate or control the process. He managed family dynamics diplomatically when conflicts arose between different preferences and expectations, and he demonstrated flexibility and compromise when our individual preferences conflicted with practical or financial constraints. Our honeymoon in Tuscany represented what I believed was the beginning of a partnership that would combine romantic fulfillment with practical cooperation and mutual support for individual professional development. Michael seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives on the art, architecture, and cultural experiences we encountered, while I found his analytical approach to travel planning and financial management both impressive and reassuring about our ability to handle complex decisions collaboratively. The first 2 years of marriage reinforced these positive patterns through daily interactions that seemed to demonstrate genuine affection, respect, and commitment to building a shared life together. Michael consistently arrived home when he said he would, provided detailed information about his work activities and client meetings, and participated enthusiastically in social activities with my friends and family members, who had initially been somewhat skeptical about whether any man could appreciate my intellectual intensity and professional ambitions. Our financial management during this period reflected what appeared to be complete transparency and shared commitment to long-term security and independence. We established joint accounts for shared expenses while maintaining individual accounts for personal expenditures, created comprehensive budgets that balanced immediate enjoyment with disciplined saving and investment, and made major financial decisions through careful discussion and mutual agreement rather than individual action or presumption. Michael's explanations of his investment strategies and client management approaches seemed sophisticated and ethically sound, reflecting advanced understanding of market dynamics and fiduciary responsibilities that impressed my father and other financial professionals in our social circle. His ability to explain complex financial concepts in accessible language suggested both technical competence and communication skills that would serve him well in continued professional advancement. The subtle changes in Michael's behavior patterns began during our 3rd year of marriage, though I initially attributed them to natural evolution in our relationship dynamics and increasing demands from his expanding client portfolio. He became more protective of his work phone and computer, explaining that new compliance regulations required greater confidentiality about client information and investment strategies that could be considered proprietary or market-sensitive. These privacy measures seemed reasonable given the nature of his professional responsibilities, particularly as Meridian Investment Partners had begun working with higher net worth clients, whose investment activities could potentially affect market conditions if information were disclosed inappropriately. Michael's discretion about specific client details appeared to reflect professional ethics and regulatory compliance rather than personal secrecy or deceptive behavior. The frequency and duration of his business trips increased significantly during this period, with Michael explaining that his success in client relationship management had resulted in expanded responsibilities for new account development and strategic planning initiatives that required more extensive travel throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic region. His detailed itineraries and regular communication during these trips initially reinforced my confidence that his increased travel reflected professional advancement rather than opportunity for personal misconduct. However, the emotional quality of our interactions began to change in ways that created subtle but persistent anxiety about the stability and authenticity of our connection. Michael became less attentive during conversations about my work projects and professional challenges, often seeming distracted or impatient when I shared details about consulting assignments or client relationships that had previously interested him significantly. His physical affection became more perfunctory and less spontaneous, as though he was fulfilling expected behaviors rather than expressing genuine desire or emotional connection. Our intimate relationship maintained technical adequacy while losing the emotional depth and mutual enthusiasm that had characterized our early years together. Though Michael attributed these changes to work stress and suggested that successful long-term relationships naturally evolved toward more mature expressions of love and commitment, the social dynamics within our relationship also shifted in ways that gradually isolated me from accurate information about Michael's activities and associations. He became more reluctant to attend social events where his colleagues might be present, explaining that he preferred to maintain clear boundaries between professional and personal relationships, rather than risk complications that could affect his advancement opportunities or client relationships. When we did attend professional functions or social gatherings that included people from Michael's work environment, he demonstrated subtle but consistent patterns of redirecting conversations away from specific details about his client assignments or travel schedule. This behavior seemed designed to prevent me from developing relationships with his colleagues that might provide independent sources of information about his professional activities. Michael's relationship with technology also changed in ways that limited my access to information about his communications and schedule management. He upgraded his phone and computer systems with enhanced security features, explaining that his firm had implemented new protocols for protecting client data and preventing unauthorized access to sensitive financial information. These security measures prevented me from accessing his email, calendar, or contact information, even when he specifically asked me to retrieve practical information about appointments or travel arrangements. The most significant warning sign that I failed to recognize at the time was Michael's gradual withdrawal from shared financial planning and investment decision-making processes that had previously been collaborative and transparent. He began handling more aspects of our portfolio management independently, explaining that his professional expertise enabled him to identify opportunities and avoid risks more effectively than our previous approach of extensive discussion and mutual agreement about major financial decisions. This shift toward individual control over our shared assets was presented as a practical efficiency improvement that would enable better investment performance and reduced transaction costs, while also reducing the time and attention I needed to devote to financial management so I could focus more completely on expanding my consulting practice and developing new client relationships. Michael's explanations for these changes seemed logical and considerate, reflecting his desire to contribute his professional expertise to our shared financial success, while reducing my administrative burden during a period when Morrison & Associates was experiencing rapid growth that required my increased attention and longer working hours. I interpreted his assumption of greater financial responsibility as supportive behavior rather than preparation for deception or asset manipulation. The gradual nature of these behavioral changes made them difficult to recognize as systematic preparation for betrayal rather than normal adaptation to evolving professional demands and relationship maturity. Each individual modification seemed reasonable when considered separately, while the cumulative effect created conditions that enabled Michael to conduct extensive, deceptive activities without triggering my suspicion or investigation. Michael's sophistication in emotional manipulation became apparent only in retrospect, as I recognized how skillfully he had anticipated and addressed potential concerns before they could develop into serious questions about his behavior or activities. When I mentioned feeling somewhat disconnected from his work life, he would arrange for increased communication during business trips or invite me to attend professional events that provided carefully controlled exposure to his colleagues and clients. When I expressed interest in learning more about his investment strategies or portfolio management techniques, he would provide detailed explanations that seemed comprehensive and educational, while actually revealing no specific information about actual clients, transactions, or account activities that could enable me to verify his claims or identify discrepancies between his statements and reality. His ability to anticipate and redirect potential investigations reflected sophisticated understanding of my personality, professional background, and analytical approaches that he had observed during our years together. Michael understood that my training in organizational psychology and strategic analysis made me naturally inclined toward systematic evaluation and evidence-based conclusions, so his deceptive strategies were specifically designed to provide plausible explanations that would satisfy my intellectual requirements while preventing access to verifiable information. The most insidious aspect of this systematic deception was how Michael used my own professional success and increasing responsibilities as justification for his secretive behavior and reduced transparency. As Morrison & Associates expanded our client base and service offerings, requiring more of my time and attention, Michael positioned his independent handling of our financial affairs as supportive partnership behavior that enabled me to focus on professional development without distraction from routine investment management tasks. This framing made questioning his financial activities seem ungrateful and inconsistent with the partnership principles we had established, while also suggesting that my concerns reflected stress and paranoia rather than legitimate reasons for investigation. Michael's ability to characterize normal oversight and communication as evidence of my professional pressure and emotional instability was particularly effective because it aligned with my own awareness of how demanding work could affect personal relationships. The turning point in recognizing these patterns came only after Madame Celeste's predictions provided a framework for reinterpreting behaviors I had been excusing or rationalizing for more than 2 years. Her specific warnings about financial theft, professional deception, and romantic betrayal enabled me to recognize connections between seemingly unrelated changes in Michael's behavior that individually appeared insignificant, but collectively revealed systematic preparation for comprehensive betrayal. Once I began investigating with focused attention rather than casual observation, the evidence of deception became overwhelming and undeniable. Bank records revealed patterns of unusual transactions that Michael had never discussed. Travel receipts showed discrepancies between his stated itineraries and actual activities, and communication records demonstrated extensive contact with Sarah Chen during periods when he claimed to be focused entirely on client development and portfolio management responsibilities. The sophistication of Michael's deceptive strategies reflected careful planning and detailed understanding of how to exploit trust, professional demands, and relationship dynamics to conduct extensive fraudulent activities, while maintaining the appearance of ethical behavior and committed partnership. His success in avoiding detection for more than 3 years demonstrated both his analytical intelligence and his complete lack of moral integrity in applying those capabilities to systematic theft and emotional manipulation. However, Michael's arrogance and assumption that I would never develop sufficient suspicion to conduct thorough investigation ultimately created the conditions for his exposure and accountability. His detailed record-keeping, which was intended to support his financial manipulation and professional deception, provided comprehensive evidence of criminal activity that would ultimately result in the complete destruction of everything he thought he was building with Sarah Chen through systematic betrayal of our marriage. The foundation of dismissal that had enabled Michael's deception was not my naivety or insufficient attention to warning signs, but rather my commitment to trust and partnership principles that he had systematically exploited, while never reciprocating with equivalent honesty or integrity. The evidence I was about to reveal would demonstrate that the problem was not my failure to recognize danger, but his deliberate choice to abuse the trust and respect that had been freely given based on his false presentation of character and values. This realization transformed my understanding of the situation from personal failure in relationship judgment to successful identification and documentation of sophisticated criminal behavior that had been carefully designed to avoid detection while systematically stealing assets and destroying lives built on fraudulent foundations. While Michael Reeves continued to maintain his carefully constructed facade of devoted husband and ethical financial professional, I had begun systematically applying the investigative methodologies I had developed through years of organizational consulting to uncover the truth about his activities and associations. This parallel journey of strategic inquiry represents the most intellectually demanding and emotionally challenging period of my professional life, though it remained completely invisible to Michael until that decisive moment when I would reveal the comprehensive evidence of his systematic betrayal. The catalyst for transforming vague anxiety into focused investigation was Madame Celeste's unnervingly specific predictions about financial theft, professional deception, and romantic betrayal involving a dark-haired woman from Michael's workplace. While my rational mind rejected supernatural claims about predicting future events, my professional training in organizational analysis recognized that her statements could serve as hypotheses to be tested through systematic data collection and objective evaluation. The methodological framework I employed drew upon forensic accounting techniques, behavioral analysis protocols, and evidence documentation procedures that I had learned during my graduate studies and refined through years of helping clients identify organizational dysfunction and management misconduct. These same analytical tools that enabled me to diagnose problems in corporate environments could be adapted to investigate potential deception within my personal relationship. The initial challenge was establishing investigative protocols that would provide reliable information about Michael's activities without alerting him to my growing suspicions or creating legal complications that might compromise my ability to recover assets or pursue criminal charges if fraud were discovered. This required developing covert information gathering strategies that respected legal boundaries while maximizing my access to verifiable evidence. My first investigative priority focused on financial records that could reveal discrepancies between Michael's claimed activities and actual transactions involving our joint accounts and shared investments. As a consulting professional who regularly analyzed financial performance data for client organizations, I possessed the technical knowledge necessary to identify unusual patterns, unauthorized transactions, and systematic diversions of funds that might escape detection by someone with less sophisticated financial analysis capabilities. The process began with comprehensive review of bank statements, credit card records, and investment portfolio documentation covering the previous 3 years, the time frame during which Michael's behavioral changes had become most apparent. This analysis required establishing baseline patterns for normal financial activity, then identifying deviations that could indicate deceptive behavior or unauthorized asset manipulation. The initial results were disturbing, but not conclusive. Our joint checking account showed regular transfers to accounts I did not recognize, typically in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic notifications, but substantial enough to represent significant cumulative diversions over extended periods. These transfers occurred with precise timing that suggested systematic planning rather than occasional lapses in financial management or accounting errors. Our investment portfolio contained positions that I had never approved or discussed, including high-risk securities that contradicted our stated investment philosophy and conservative approach to asset allocation. More troubling, several of these investments showed substantial losses that had been offset by liquidating profitable positions without my knowledge or consent, suggesting that someone was using our shared accounts to cover losses from unauthorized trading activities. The credit card analysis revealed patterns of expenditure that were inconsistent with Michael's claimed travel schedule and business activities. Charges appeared for restaurants, hotels, and transportation in cities where he had never mentioned conducting business, often during periods when he claimed to be managing routine client meetings in locations that should not have required overnight stays or expensive entertainment expenses. Most significantly, several credit cards had been opened in my name without my knowledge, using my social security number and employment information but listing Michael as an authorized user with full access to account management and transaction approval. These cards showed substantial balances that had been accumulated through cash advances and high-value purchases that I had never authorized or benefited from directly. The second phase of investigation focused on Michael's communication patterns and professional associations that could provide information about his actual activities and relationships during periods when he claimed to be conducting routine business travel or client development meetings. This analysis required accessing information sources that would not trigger security alerts or create evidence of my investigative activities. Through professional networking platforms and public social media profiles, I began systematically researching Meridian Investment Partners staff members to identify individuals who matched Madame Celeste's description of a dark-haired woman involved in Michael's deceptive activities. This research revealed Sarah Chen, a portfolio manager who had joined the firm approximately 4 years earlier, and whose professional background included international experience that could explain Michael's recent interest in global investment strategies and emerging market opportunities. Sarah's professional profile indicated expertise in Asian financial markets and experience with international portfolio management that aligned with several of Michael's recent client presentations and investment recommendations. More significantly, her LinkedIn activity and professional association memberships suggested frequent travel to conferences and client meetings that corresponded with Michael's unexplained absences and inconsistent explanations about his business development activities. The third investigative approach involved analyzing Michael's digital footprint and technology usage patterns for evidence of concealed communications or activities that contradicted his statements about professional responsibilities and personal commitments. This analysis required sophisticated technical knowledge and careful attention to legal boundaries regarding privacy rights and unauthorized access to electronic communications. Through analysis of our shared computer networks and cloud storage systems, I discovered evidence of encrypted communications and file storage that Michael had established without my knowledge. While I could not access the content of these communications without potentially violating privacy laws, the existence of hidden digital infrastructure suggested systematic effort to conceal activities and communications from routine household visibility. The metadata analysis of our shared photo storage revealed images that had been uploaded from locations and at times that contradicted Michael's stated travel schedule and business activities. Several photos showed settings that appeared to be romantic or leisure-oriented rather than professional, including restaurants and hotel locations that seemed inconsistent with business meetings or client relationship management responsibilities. The fourth phase of investigation involved direct observation and documentation of Michael's actual behavior during periods when he claimed to be conducting specific professional activities. This approach required careful planning to avoid detection while gathering verifiable information about his actual whereabouts and associations during claimed business travel and client meetings. Using vacation time from Morrison & Associates that I presented as personal development and relaxation, I conducted discreet surveillance of Michael's actual activities during several claimed business trips. This surveillance revealed systematic patterns of deception regarding his destinations, companions, and activities during periods when he claimed to be focused entirely on client development and portfolio management responsibilities. On 3 separate occasions, Michael's actual activities contradicted his stated itineraries and professional obligations. During a claimed client development trip to Boston, he actually traveled to New York City and spent 2 days at luxury hotels and restaurants with Sarah Chen, engaging in activities that were clearly romantic rather than professional in nature. During a supposed portfolio management conference in Philadelphia, he and Sarah traveled to Atlantic City for what appeared to be a personal vacation that included gambling and entertainment activities that consumed substantial funds from sources I could not identify. Most significantly, during a claimed week-long strategic planning retreat that supposedly required complete communication blackout to facilitate intensive analytical work, Michael and Sarah traveled to the Bahamas for a romantic vacation that was documented through social media posts and credit card transactions that revealed the use of funds that had been systematically transferred from our joint accounts without my knowledge or authorization. The surveillance activities also provided opportunities to document Michael and Sarah's relationship dynamics and communication patterns that suggested extensive emotional involvement and long-term planning that extended far beyond casual professional association or temporary romantic involvement. Their interactions demonstrated intimate familiarity and shared decision-making that indicated a committed partnership that had been developing parallel to Michael's marriage with me for an extended period. The fifth investigative approach focused on analyzing Michael's professional activities and client relationships for evidence of ethical violations, regulatory non-compliance, or criminal activity that could explain the source of funds being used to support his lifestyle with Sarah and finance their apparent plans for relocated employment and shared future arrangements. Through analysis of Michael's client management activities and investment recommendations, I discovered patterns of questionable trading practices that suggested potential securities violations and fiduciary responsibility breaches. Several of his client portfolios showed unusual concentrations in high-risk investments that generated substantial commissions but delivered poor performance results that had been concealed through selective reporting and misleading communication about market conditions and investment strategy effectiveness. Most troubling, several clients had experienced significant losses in their retirement accounts and educational savings plans due to unauthorized trading activities that Michael had conducted without proper disclosure or consent procedures. These losses had been concealed through complex portfolio restructuring and misleading performance reporting that violated both firm policies and federal securities regulations governing fiduciary responsibilities and client communication requirements. The investigation revealed that Michael had been using his position at Meridian Investment Partners to conduct systematic theft from client accounts through unauthorized trading, excessive fee structures, and intentional misrepresentation of investment performance and risk characteristics. These activities generated substantial income that he had been using to finance his relationship with Sarah Chen, while systematically transferring assets from our shared accounts to prevent detection of his lifestyle expenses and travel activities. The sixth phase of investigation involved documenting the comprehensive scope of Michael and Sarah's plans for relocating their relationship and careers to international locations, where they believed they could avoid accountability for their systematic theft and regulatory violations. This documentation required accessing information about employment opportunities, visa applications, and financial arrangements that revealed the extent of their strategic planning and preparation for permanent departure from their current professional and personal obligations. Through analysis of travel documents and employment correspondence that I accessed during brief periods when Michael's home office was unattended, I discovered detailed plans for relocating to Singapore, where Sarah's family controlled substantial business interests that could provide employment opportunities and legal protection from United States regulatory authorities and criminal prosecution. The relocation plans included comprehensive strategies for liquidating assets, transferring funds to international accounts, and establishing new professional identities that would enable them to avoid accountability for their systematic theft and regulatory violations. These plans revealed sophisticated understanding of international financial regulations and asset protection strategies that suggested extensive consultation with legal and financial advisors who specialized in facilitating questionable international business arrangements. Most significantly, the documentation revealed that Michael and Sarah had been systematically preparing for this relocation for more than 18 months, during which time Michael had maintained normal routines and interactions with me, while privately liquidating our shared assets and preparing for permanent abandonment of our marriage and his professional obligations in the United States. The seventh and final phase of investigation involved compiling comprehensive documentation that could support criminal charges and civil asset recovery proceedings, while ensuring that all evidence had been obtained through legal methods that would withstand judicial scrutiny and professional examination by law enforcement authorities and financial regulators. This documentation process required organizing thousands of financial records, communication logs, travel documents, and surveillance observations into coherent narrative structure that demonstrated systematic patterns of deception, theft, and regulatory violations, rather than isolated incidents or circumstantial evidence that could be explained through alternative interpretations. The final investigative report contained more than 300 pages of documented evidence, including bank records showing systematic unauthorized transfers totaling more than $400,000, communication records demonstrating extensive coordination between Michael and Sarah regarding asset liquidation and international relocation plans, and professional conduct violations that represented serious breaches of fiduciary responsibility and securities regulation compliance. The evidence demonstrated that Michael's systematic theft had extended beyond our shared marital assets to include client funds, regulatory violations, and tax evasion that represented federal crimes with substantial criminal penalties and civil liability exposures. The comprehensive scope of his criminal activity ensured that his discovery would result in complete destruction of his professional reputation, significant prison sentences, and permanent prohibition from financial services employment. The investigation had required 6 months of intensive effort that demanded extraordinary discipline and emotional resilience, while maintaining normal professional responsibilities and personal routines that prevented Michael from recognizing my systematic documentation of his criminal activities. The intellectual and emotional challenges of conducting covert investigation while maintaining marriage routines with someone who was systematically betraying and stealing from me represented the most difficult period of my personal and professional life. However, the investigation had also demonstrated that systematic application of professional analytical methodologies could uncover even sophisticated deception and document criminal activity that perpetrators believed was undetectable. The evidence I had compiled would not only recover stolen assets and ensure criminal accountability, but would also serve as comprehensive proof that trusting professional instincts and conducting thorough investigation could reveal truth, even in situations where deception had been carefully constructed to avoid detection. The USB drive that would transform my apparent victimization into comprehensive victory represented validation that intellectual rigor, professional competence, and strategic patience could overcome even sophisticated betrayal and systematic theft when applied with sufficient dedication and methodological sophistication. The morning that would force my transformation from secret investigator to active prosecutor began with what appeared to be routine domestic conversation over coffee in our Brooklyn Heights kitchen. Michael sat across from me reading financial news on his tablet while I reviewed client proposals for Morrison & Associates, both of us maintaining the comfortable rhythms of married professionals who had shared countless similar mornings throughout our 8 years together. What Michael did not realize was that every casual remark, every spontaneous decision, and every seemingly innocent communication had become evidence in the comprehensive case I was building against him. 6 months of systematic investigation had transformed me into someone who analyzed his behavior with forensic precision while maintaining the appearance of unsuspecting partnership. "I have some exciting news to share," Michael announced with the enthusiasm I had once found endearing but now recognized as manipulation designed to gauge my reactions and control my emotional responses. "Meridian has offered me an incredible opportunity to lead their new Singapore office. It would mean relocating within the next 3 months, but the compensation package and career advancement potential are extraordinary." The timing of this announcement was not coincidental. My investigation had revealed that Michael and Sarah Chen had been preparing for international relocation for more than 18 months, systematically liquidating assets and establishing offshore financial arrangements, while Michael maintained normal domestic routines designed to prevent my recognition of their comprehensive exit strategy. However, Michael's confidence in my continued ignorance had led him to underestimate my analytical capabilities and investigative determination. The excitement in his voice reflected his belief that he was approaching the successful culmination of a sophisticated plan that would enable him to abandon our marriage with substantial stolen assets, while avoiding accountability for systematic theft and securities violations. "That sounds like a significant opportunity," I replied, with carefully calibrated enthusiasm that concealed my recognition that his announcement represented the catalyst event I had been anticipating. "Tell me more about the specific responsibilities and what this would mean for our shared financial planning and long-term goals." Michael's explanation revealed the sophisticated nature of his deceptive strategy and the arrogance that had led him to maintain detailed documentation of criminal activities he believed would remain undetected. The Singapore position was not a legitimate employment offer, but rather a fabricated opportunity created by Sarah's family business interests to provide cover for their relocated relationship and stolen assets. The position involves establishing Meridian's Asian portfolio management division, with a focus on emerging markets and high-net-worth client development throughout Southeast Asia. Michael continued with the detailed preparation that characterized all his deceptive communications. Sarah Chen would be joining the team as well, given her expertise in Asian financial markets and international client relationship management. This revelation confirmed my investigation findings while providing additional evidence of the comprehensive scope of their collaborative deception. Sarah's involvement was being presented as professional coincidence rather than romantic partnership, suggesting that Michael intended to maintain his deceptive relationship management strategies, even during the process of abandoning our marriage. The compensation structure includes substantial relocation benefits, housing allowances, and performance incentives that would more than double my current income within the first year. Michael added with emphasis on financial benefits that he knew would appeal to my practical approach to major life decisions. This could accelerate our long-term financial security by several years, while providing incredible international experience and professional development opportunities. The irony of Michael discussing, quote, "our financial security," while systematically stealing our shared assets represented the epitome of his manipulative approach to our relationship. His ability to express concern for our shared future, while privately planning its destruction, demonstrated the sophisticated psychological manipulation that had enabled his deception to continue undetected for more than 3 years. "This opportunity does sound compelling," I acknowledged while internally recognizing that his announcement had created the urgency necessary to reveal my investigation findings and prevent his successful escape with stolen assets. However, such a significant relocation decision would require careful analysis of all implications, including tax consequences, career impact for my consulting practice, and long-term strategic alignment with our shared goals. Michael's immediate response revealed his impatience with any process that might delay his departure or create opportunities for discovery of his criminal activities. "Catherine, sometimes extraordinary opportunities require quick decision-making rather than extensive analysis. The Singapore office launch is proceeding on an accelerated timeline, and Meridian needs commitment within the next 2 weeks to finalize visa applications and relocation logistics. This artificial urgency was designed to prevent thorough evaluation that might reveal inconsistencies in his explanation, or create opportunities for me to conduct independent verification of his claims about employment opportunities and compensation structures. Michael's professional experience had taught him that time pressure could be used to override analytical objections and force acceptance of decisions that might not withstand careful scrutiny. However, his pressure tactics also revealed anxiety about maintaining control over information and timeline that suggested awareness of potential vulnerabilities in his deceptive strategy. The combination of excitement about departure opportunities and urgency about decision-making timelines indicated that Michael's apparent confidence concealed significant concern about the sustainability of his systematic deception. "I understand the timeline considerations," I replied with apparent cooperation that concealed my strategic planning for revealing evidence that would destroy his carefully constructed escape plans. "Perhaps you could provide more detailed information about the specific terms of this offer so I can evaluate the implications more effectively." Michael's reluctance to provide verifiable documentation reflected his recognition that detailed scrutiny might reveal inconsistencies or impossibilities in his fabricated employment opportunity. The formal offer documents are still being finalized by Meridian's legal department and the Singapore regulatory authorities. However, I can share the preliminary terms and compensation structure so you can begin considering how this might affect your own professional planning. This evasiveness confirmed my investigation findings about the fraudulent nature of his claimed employment opportunity, while providing additional evidence of his systematic approach to avoiding accountability through international relocation. Michael's inability to provide concrete documentation reflected the reality that his Singapore plans were based on stolen assets and fabricated employment rather than legitimate professional advancement. The conversation continued with Michael providing increasingly detailed explanations of logistical arrangements and timeline requirements that revealed extensive preparation and coordination with Sarah Chen regarding their relocation plans. Each detail he shared provided additional confirmation of my investigation findings while demonstrating the comprehensive scope of their deceptive partnership. Sarah has been instrumental in developing relationships with potential clients and regulatory contacts in Singapore. Michael explained with admiration that revealed the depth of his emotional involvement despite his attempts to characterize their association as purely professional. Her family connections and cultural expertise have been invaluable in creating the foundation for Meridian's expansion into Asian markets. This acknowledgement of Sarah's extensive involvement provided conclusive evidence of their collaborative relationship while revealing Michael's confidence that his deceptive strategy would prevent my recognition of the romantic partnership that motivated their professional collaboration. His willingness to praise Sarah's contributions reflected his assumption that I remained ignorant of their personal relationship and comprehensive planning for shared relocation. Her cultural background and professional experience do seem well suited to international expansion opportunities. I agreed while recognizing that Michael's enthusiastic descriptions of Sarah's capabilities provided additional evidence of their personal partnership. "Have you had extensive opportunities to work with her on client development and strategic planning initiatives?" Michael's detailed response revealed intimate knowledge of Sarah's professional capabilities and personal characteristics that extended far beyond normal colleague relationships. His descriptions demonstrated comprehensive familiarity with her background, preferences, and strategic thinking that could only result from extensive personal involvement and collaborative planning over extended periods. The conversation also revealed Michael's systematic approach to minimizing my role in relocation decision-making, while creating apparent opportunities for my input and collaboration. This manipulation strategy was designed to maintain his control over information and timeline, while providing me with enough involvement to prevent suspicion about his independent planning and preparation for departure. Obviously, your consulting practice would need to be considered carefully as we evaluate this opportunity. Michael continued with apparent concern for my professional interests that concealed his complete lack of actual interest in my career development or financial security. "Perhaps you could explore opportunities for establishing international client relationships or remote service delivery that would enable you to maintain Morrison & Associates' involvement while we explore living in Singapore." This suggestion revealed Michael's recognition that maintaining appearances of mutual consideration and shared planning was essential for preventing my investigation or resistance to his relocation timeline. His apparent concern for my professional continuity reflected strategic manipulation rather than genuine partnership consideration or commitment to our shared future success. However, Michael's elaborate deceptive communication also created the perfect opportunity for revealing my comprehensive investigation findings and destroying his carefully constructed plans for escape with stolen assets. His detailed explanations of relocation logistics and timeline requirements provided specific claims that could be systematically refuted through the evidence I had compiled over 6 months of intensive investigation. Michael, your enthusiasm for this Singapore opportunity is evident, and I appreciate your consideration of how this might affect my consulting practice. I replied with apparent cooperation that concealed my preparation for comprehensive revelation of his systematic deception. However, before we proceed with such significant life changes, I think we need to have a more comprehensive discussion about our current financial situation and long-term planning objectives. The slight change in my tone and the introduction of financial discussion topics created visible anxiety in Michael's demeanor, though he attempted to maintain his confident presentation of the relocation opportunity as mutually beneficial advancement rather than individual escape strategy. What specific financial considerations are you thinking about? Michael asked with apparent openness that concealed his concern about potential discovery of his systematic theft and asset manipulation activities. This question provided the perfect transition for revealing my investigation findings and demonstrating that his assumptions about my ignorance and passivity had been completely incorrect. The moment had arrived to transform my role from victim to prosecutor, while exposing the comprehensive scope of his criminal activities and collaborative deception with Sarah Chen. Actually, Michael, I have been conducting some analysis of our financial position and investment performance over the past several months. I began with professional neutrality that concealed the devastating impact of my upcoming revelations. I have discovered some concerning patterns that suggest we need to address significant issues before considering any major life changes or international relocation. Michael's immediate physical reaction of tension and defensive positioning revealed his recognition that his careful deceptive strategy might be facing unexpected challenges that could threaten his timeline for departure and asset extraction. His confident enthusiasm about Singapore opportunities transformed into cautious attention to potential threats to his systematic theft and escape planning. What kind of patterns are you referring to? He asked, with apparent curiosity that barely concealed growing anxiety about the scope of my investigation and the implications for his carefully constructed deceptive strategy. The question represented the perfect opportunity for beginning the systematic revelation of evidence that would destroy Michael's confidence, expose the comprehensive scope of his criminal activities, and demonstrate that his victim had transformed into a formidable adversary, with documentation sufficient to ensure his criminal prosecution and asset recovery. The catalyst event had created the urgency and opportunity necessary for revealing 6 months of intensive investigation while preventing Michael's successful escape with stolen assets and fraudulent employment arrangements. The moment for transformation from secret investigator to active prosecutor had arrived, and Michael was about to discover that his systematic underestimation of my capabilities had created the conditions for his own comprehensive defeat and accountability. The Singapore relocation timeline that was supposed to represent the culmination of his successful deception would instead become the deadline for his criminal prosecution and the complete destruction of everything he thought he was building with Sarah Chen, through systematic betrayal of our marriage and theft of our shared assets. The moment I had been strategically preparing for during 6 months of intensive investigation had arrived with Michael's announcement of the fabricated Singapore opportunity. His confident presentation of relocation plans that represented the culmination of systematic theft and comprehensive betrayal created the perfect context for beginning to reveal the evidence that would destroy his carefully constructed deception and expose the criminal activities he believed remained undetectable. Michael, I need to share some information with you that will significantly impact our discussion about international relocation and long-term financial planning. I began with professional composure that concealed the strategic satisfaction of finally transitioning from secret investigator to active prosecutor. Over the past several months, I have been conducting comprehensive analysis of our financial records and investment performance, and I have discovered patterns that raise serious concerns about unauthorized activities and systematic asset manipulation. The change in Michael's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. His confident enthusiasm about Singapore opportunities transformed into defensive alertness as he recognized that his assumptions about my continued ignorance and passive acceptance might have been fundamentally incorrect. The casual breakfast conversation atmosphere shifted to formal interrogation dynamics as Michael realized that his carefully maintained deceptive strategy was facing unexpected challenges. "What kind of analysis are you referring to, Catherine?" Michael asked with forced calm that barely concealed growing anxiety about the scope of my investigation and potential threats to his systematic theft and escape planning. "Our financial management has been handled according to standard investment principles and risk management protocols that reflect current market conditions and long-term strategic objectives." This defensive response revealed Michael's immediate recognition that his criminal activities might face exposure while demonstrating his continued commitment to maintaining deceptive explanations, even when confronted with direct challenges to his fraudulent behavior. His attempt to characterize systematic theft as legitimate financial management reflected the arrogance and psychological manipulation that had enabled his deception to continue for more than 3 years. "Actually, Michael, my analysis has revealed significant discrepancies between your stated investment activities and the actual transactions that have been occurring in our joint accounts and shared portfolio holdings," I replied with factual precision that established the analytical foundation for the comprehensive evidence I was prepared to present. These discrepancies suggest systematic, unauthorized transfers and asset manipulation that cannot be explained through normal market fluctuations or standard portfolio management practices. I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a manila folder containing the first portion of documentation I had compiled during months of intensive financial forensic analysis. The folder represented a strategic selection of evidence designed to demonstrate the scope of my investigation while maintaining additional documentation for progressive revelation based on Michael's responses and continued attempts at deceptive explanation. These bank statements show unauthorized transfers totaling $47,000 from our joint savings account to accounts that I did not authorize and cannot identify. I continued while placing specific documentation on the kitchen table between us. The transfers occurred systematically over the past 18 months, using access codes and authorization procedures that required detailed knowledge of our account structures and security protocols. Michael's physical reaction to seeing concrete documentation of his theft was profound and unmistakable. The confident posture he had maintained during his Singapore presentation collapsed into defensive tension as he realized that his systematic asset manipulation had been discovered and documented with the type of precision that could support criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery proceedings. "Catherine, there must be some misunderstanding about these transactions." Michael replied with forced composure that revealed his recognition that casual dismissal would be insufficient to address comprehensive financial documentation. "My portfolio management responsibilities sometimes require temporary transfers for strategic positioning and market timing optimization that can appear unusual without proper context about investment methodologies and performance objectives." This attempted explanation demonstrated Michael's sophisticated approach to deceptive communication while revealing his continued underestimation of my analytical capabilities and investigation thoroughness. His assumption that technical financial terminology and complex strategic explanations would confuse or satisfy my concerns reflected his persistent belief that I lacked sufficient expertise to evaluate his fraudulent activities comprehensively. "Michael, my professional background in organizational consulting includes extensive training in financial analysis and forensic accounting methodologies," I responded with quiet authority that established my competence to evaluate his explanations and identify continued deception. "These transfers cannot be characterized as strategic portfolio positioning because they involved movement of funds to accounts that are not listed in any of our investment documentation and show no corresponding securities purchases or performance reporting." Quote, "I placed additional documentation on the table that revealed the comprehensive scope of my investigation and the systematic nature of Michael's criminal activities. The bank records showed detailed transaction histories that demonstrated patterns of theft extending far beyond the initial transfers I had mentioned, creating evidence of systematic asset manipulation that could not be dismissed through superficial explanations or technical terminology. Furthermore, My analysis has revealed that these unauthorized transfers correspond precisely with expenditures for travel, entertainment, and luxury purchases that do not appear in our shared household budget or legitimate business expense categories. I continued while observing Michael's growing recognition that his deceptive strategy was facing comprehensive challenge rather than casual inquiry. The travel documentation I presented included detailed records of expenditures in locations where Michael had never claimed to conduct business activities, during time periods when he had provided alternative explanations for his whereabouts and professional responsibilities. The specificity of this evidence eliminated any possibility that his systematic theft could be characterized as accounting errors or misunderstood legitimate activities. These hotel and restaurant charges in New York City, Atlantic City, and the Bahamas occurred during periods when you claimed to be conducting client meetings in Boston, Philadelphia, and attending communication-restricted strategic planning retreats. I explained while placing corresponding documentation that demonstrated the systematic nature of his deceptive behavior. The expenditures total more than $23,000 and show patterns of luxury entertainment that are inconsistent with professional business activities or individual travel preferences. Michael's attempt to maintain composure became increasingly strained as the evidence revealed not only systematic theft but comprehensive documentation of his personal activities and deceptive relationship management. His recognition that I had been conducting sophisticated investigation rather than accepting his explanations created visible anxiety about the potential scope of my knowledge and the implications for his escape planning. Additionally, my analysis has revealed that several credit cards have been opened in my name without my knowledge or authorization, using my personal information but providing you with full access to account management and transaction approval capabilities. I continued with systematic presentation of evidence that demonstrated criminal activity extending beyond unauthorized transfers to identity theft and credit fraud. The credit card documentation showed substantial balances that had been accumulated through cash advances and high-value purchases that provided no benefit to our shared household or legitimate investment activities. The systematic nature of this fraud revealed sophisticated planning and implementation that could not be characterized as isolated mistakes or temporary lapses in financial judgment. Michael, these credit card accounts show combined balances exceeding $68,000 that were accumulated without my knowledge, while you maintained normal household financial discussions and shared budget planning. I explained while observing his increasing recognition that his criminal activities had been comprehensively documented with precision that could support criminal prosecution. The most devastating aspect of this initial revelation was demonstrating that my investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic planning rather than impulsive misconduct or temporary financial difficulties. The credit card fraud required detailed knowledge of my personal information and careful timing to avoid detection, suggesting sophisticated criminal intent rather than desperate responses to immediate financial pressures. Furthermore, my analysis has revealed that the timing of these fraudulent activities corresponds precisely with changes in your professional behavior and personal communication patterns that I had previously attributed to work stress and natural relationship evolution. I continued while establishing connections between his criminal activities and the behavioral changes that had initially created subtle anxiety about our relationship dynamics. The systematic nature of Michael's deception became undeniable when viewed through the framework of financial evidence, rather than isolated behavioral observations. The comprehensive documentation revealed that his emotional manipulation and strategic relationship management had been specifically designed to conceal criminal activities rather than reflecting natural adaptation to professional demands or relationship maturity. The evidence indicates that your systematic theft and fraudulent activities have been occurring for more than 3 years, during which time you have maintained normal domestic routines and shared financial planning discussions while privately liquidating our assets and accumulating debt obligations using my identity and credit standing. I explained with professional composure that concealed the emotional impact of revealing the comprehensive scope of his betrayal. Michael's recognition that his carefully constructed deceptive strategy had been comprehensively penetrated and documented created desperation that manifested through aggressive defensive responses rather than acknowledgement or attempts at reconciliation. His realization that I possessed specific evidence of criminal activities rather than vague suspicions about relationship problems eliminated his ability to maintain casual dismissal or emotional manipulation tactics. Catherine, I think you are misinterpreting legitimate financial management activities through excessive analysis that reflects stress from your consulting practice rather than accurate evaluation of our shared financial situation. Michael replied with desperation that revealed his recognition that standard deceptive techniques would be insufficient to address comprehensive evidence documentation. This attempt to characterize systematic theft as misinterpretation, while attributing my investigation to professional stress, demonstrated Michael's continued commitment to psychological manipulation even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of criminal activity. His assumption that questioning my analytical capabilities would create doubt about my evidence reflected persistent underestimation of my professional competence and investigative determination. Michael, my analysis has been conducted using standard forensic accounting methodologies and has been independently verified through consultation with financial professionals who specialize in fraud detection and asset recovery proceedings. I responded with authority that eliminated any possibility that my evidence could be dismissed through challenges to my analytical capabilities or professional expertise. The mention of independent verification created immediate panic in Michael's demeanor, as he realized that his criminal activities had been documented not only by his victim, but also by external professionals who could provide expert testimony and support criminal prosecution efforts. His recognition that my investigation extended beyond personal relationship concerns to comprehensive criminal documentation created desperation about the potential consequences for his freedom and professional future. Additionally, my investigation has revealed evidence of your systematic coordination with Sarah Chen regarding financial planning and asset management activities that extend far beyond legitimate professional collaboration. I continued while observing Michael's shock at discovering that his romantic relationship and collaborative deception had also been identified and documented. This revelation eliminated Michael's ability to maintain that his relationship with Sarah represented purely professional association or casual personal involvement. The evidence demonstrated systematic coordination regarding our shared assets and comprehensive planning for their mutual benefit using funds that had been stolen from our joint accounts and fraudulent credit arrangements established using my identity. The documentation shows that your relationship with Sarah Chen has involved extensive coordination regarding travel arrangements, entertainment expenditures, and long-term financial planning that utilized funds stolen from our shared accounts while she provided professional expertise and personal support for your systematic theft and fraudulent activities. I explained while establishing that his betrayal extended beyond individual misconduct to collaborative criminal enterprise. Michael's realization that both his romantic relationship and his criminal activities had been comprehensively documented created complete collapse of his confident presentation and strategic deception management. His recognition that I possessed evidence of systematic coordination with Sarah Chen eliminated any possibility that his criminal activities could be characterized as isolated mistakes or temporary lapses in judgment. The first revelation had achieved its strategic objective of demonstrating that Michael's assumptions about my ignorance and passivity had been completely incorrect, while establishing that his systematic theft and comprehensive deception had been matched by equally systematic investigation and evidence documentation. His confidence in his deceptive capabilities had been replaced by recognition that his victim had transformed into a formidable adversary with comprehensive evidence of criminal activities. However, this initial presentation represented only a fraction of the documentation I had compiled during 6 months of intensive investigation. The evidence I had revealed was specifically selected to demonstrate the scope of my knowledge, while maintaining additional documentation for progressive revelation based on Michael's continued attempts at deception or denial. The transformation from breakfast conversation about relocation opportunities to formal presentation of criminal evidence had established new dynamics that eliminated Michael's ability to maintain his carefully constructed facade, while creating the foundation for comprehensive revelation of his systematic betrayal and criminal activities. The comprehensive financial evidence I had presented created an immediate crisis in Michael's carefully maintained deceptive strategy, yet his response revealed the sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms that had enabled his systematic theft to continue undetected for more than 3 years. Rather than acknowledging the overwhelming documentation of criminal activity, Michael demonstrated the predictable patterns of denial, minimization, and counterattack that characterize individuals who have built their lives on elaborate deception. Catherine, I understand that these financial records might appear concerning when viewed without proper context about portfolio management strategies and market timing considerations. Michael began with forced professional composure that barely concealed his desperation to regain control over our conversation and prevent further revelation of his criminal activities. However, your interpretation of these transactions reflects fundamental misunderstanding of sophisticated investment methodologies that require temporary asset repositioning and strategic allocation adjustments. This initial response demonstrated Michael's commitment to maintaining his deceptive framework even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of systematic theft. His assumption that technical financial terminology and complex strategic explanations would confuse my analysis or create reasonable doubt about criminal activity revealed his persistent underestimation of my professional capabilities and investigative thoroughness. The psychological dynamics underlying Michael's denial reflected classic patterns observed in individuals who have constructed elaborate deceptive identities that become integral to their self-concept and social positioning. Acknowledging the reality of his systematic theft would require accepting that his professional reputation, personal relationships, and future opportunities had been built on comprehensive fraud rather than legitimate achievement and ethical behavior. Michael, these transactions cannot be characterized as portfolio management because they involve direct transfers to personal accounts that show no corresponding investment activities or performance reporting. I replied with analytical precision that systematically dismantled his attempted explanations. The documentation shows that funds were transferred to accounts controlled exclusively by you and used for personal expenditures that provided no benefit to our shared financial objectives or legitimate investment strategies. The specificity of my response created immediate recognition that casual dismissal would be insufficient to address comprehensive evidence documentation. Michael's confident presentation of technical explanations collapsed into defensive uncertainty as he realized that his victim possessed sufficient expertise to evaluate and refute his fraudulent justifications systematically. Furthermore, the timing of these transfers corresponds precisely with your travel expenditures and entertainment activities that you have consistently misrepresented through false explanations about professional responsibilities and client relationship management. I continued while observing Michael's growing recognition that his behavioral deception had been documented alongside his financial crimes. The connection between systematic theft and systematic lying created a comprehensive pattern that eliminated any possibility that his criminal activities could be characterized as isolated mistakes or temporary lapses in judgment. The evidence demonstrated sophisticated planning and implementation that required sustained deceptive behavior across multiple aspects of our relationship and shared financial management. Michael's second defensive strategy involved attempting to shift responsibility for his criminal activities to external pressures and institutional demands that supposedly justified unauthorized asset manipulation and deceptive relationship management. This approach reflected sophisticated understanding of victim psychology and social dynamics that could potentially create sympathy or understanding for behavior that would otherwise be recognized as purely criminal. The financial services industry has become increasingly demanding regarding performance expectations and client relationship management that sometimes requires immediate access to capital for strategic positioning and market opportunity development. Michael explained with apparent sincerity that concealed his systematic manipulation of legitimate professional pressures to justify personal theft and fraud. This explanation demonstrated Michael's ability to exploit genuine workplace challenges and industry pressures to create plausible justifications for criminal behavior, while positioning himself as someone responding to external demands, rather than pursuing personal enrichment through systematic theft. His sophisticated understanding of financial industry dynamics enabled him to construct explanations that might seem reasonable to someone, without detailed knowledge of professional ethics and regulatory requirements. Additionally, the Singapore opportunity represents time-sensitive international expansion that required preliminary financial arrangements and strategic positioning to demonstrate serious commitment and professional capability to potential employers and regulatory authorities. Michael continued with increasing desperation masked as professional explanation. The reference to Singapore opportunities revealed Michael's continued commitment to his fabricated relocation plans, even when confronted with evidence of criminal activity that would make international employment impossible due to regulatory background checks and professional licensing requirements. His persistence in maintaining deceptive explanations demonstrated complete disconnection from the reality of his situation and the inevitable consequences of his systematic theft and fraud. Michael, professional pressures and international opportunities do not justify identity theft, credit fraud, and systematic asset manipulation that violate both civil and criminal legal standards. I responded with authority that eliminated any possibility that his criminal activities could be characterized as legitimate professional behavior or understandable responses to workplace demands. The mention of specific criminal charges created immediate panic in Michael's demeanor, as he realized that my investigation had identified legal violations with serious consequences for his freedom and professional future. His recognition that casual explanations and professional justifications would be insufficient to address comprehensive criminal evidence created desperation that manifested through increasingly aggressive defensive responses. Michael's third defensive approach involved attempting to characterize my investigation and evidence presentation as excessive surveillance and violation of marriage trust that represented greater relationship dysfunction than his systematic theft and comprehensive deception. This psychological manipulation technique reflected sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and relationship expectations that could potentially create doubt about my motivations or analytical conclusions. Catherine, I am deeply concerned that you have been conducting secretive investigation of our shared financial activities without discussing your concerns directly or providing opportunities for explanation and collaborative problem-solving. Michael replied, with apparent hurt and disappointment that concealed his recognition that my investigation threatened his carefully constructed criminal enterprise. This response demonstrated Michael's ability to transform criminal exposure into relationship conflict, while positioning himself as the victim of excessive surveillance, rather than the perpetrator of systematic theft and fraud. His sophisticated manipulation of victim psychology reflected years of experience in managing my emotional responses and controlling information access to prevent discovery of his criminal activities. The level of detailed analysis and external consultation you describe suggests surveillance behavior that violates the trust and privacy expectations that should characterize healthy marriage partnerships. Michael continued with apparent sincerity that revealed his desperate attempt to regain psychological control over our interaction and prevent further revelation of criminal evidence. The characterization of criminal investigation as marriage trust violation demonstrated Michael's complete commitment to maintaining deceptive relationship management, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of his systematic betrayal and theft. His ability to express concern about marriage trust while systematically violating every aspect of our partnership reflected the sophisticated psychological manipulation that had enabled his deception to continue for extended periods. Michael, discovering systematic theft, identity fraud, and comprehensive deception, required thorough investigation to document the scope of criminal activity and protect our shared assets from continued unauthorized access. I replied with professional composure that eliminated any possibility that my investigation could be characterized as excessive surveillance or inappropriate relationship behavior. The reference to asset protection and criminal documentation established the legitimate foundation for my investigative activities while demonstrating that my actions reflected responsible financial management rather than paranoid surveillance or relationship dysfunction. The professional framework for my response eliminated Michael's ability to characterize evidence gathering as personal failing or marriage trust violation. Michael's fourth defensive strategy involved attempting to minimize the significance of documented criminal activity through claims that financial irregularities represented temporary problems that could be resolved through internal discussion and adjustment, rather than external legal proceedings or formal accountability measures. This approach reflected his desperate attempt to contain the consequences of his systematic theft while maintaining the possibility of successful escape with stolen assets. These financial discrepancies, while regrettable, represent problems that can be addressed through careful planning and systematic repayment, rather than external involvement that could create unnecessary complications for both our professional reputations and long-term financial security. Michael explained with apparent reasonableness that concealed his recognition that criminal prosecution would destroy his Singapore escape plans and professional future. This minimization technique demonstrated Michael's sophisticated understanding of victim psychology and conflict resolution dynamics that could potentially create pressure for private settlement rather than formal legal proceedings. His ability to frame systematic theft as financial discrepancy reflected years of experience in managing my emotional responses and preventing recognition of the comprehensive scope of his criminal activities. The Singapore opportunity provides exceptional income potential that would enable rapid resolution of any financial irregularities while creating substantial long-term security for both of our professional and personal objectives. Michael continued with increasing desperation masked as strategic planning and collaborative problem-solving. The persistent reference to fabricated Singapore opportunities revealed Michael's complete disconnection from the reality that comprehensive criminal evidence would make international relocation impossible due to background check requirements and professional licensing standards. His continued commitment to deceptive escape planning demonstrated his inability to acknowledge the inevitable consequences of systematic theft and fraud. Michael, identity theft, systematic asset manipulation, and comprehensive fraud cannot be characterized as financial discrepancies that can be resolved through private discussion and repayment arrangements. I responded with authority that established the criminal nature of his activities and eliminated any possibility that informal resolution would be appropriate or sufficient. The specification of criminal charges rather than financial problems demonstrated that Michael's systematic theft had exceeded civil dispute boundaries and created legal violations with mandatory reporting requirements and formal prosecution procedures. His recognition that private settlement would be insufficient to address criminal activity created complete collapse of his minimization strategy. Michael's fifth and most desperate defensive approach involved direct attacks on my analytical capabilities and professional competence, in an attempt to create doubt about the validity of my evidence, documentation, and investigative conclusions. This strategy reflected his recognition that previous defensive techniques had failed to address comprehensive criminal evidence, and that aggressive counterattack represented his final opportunity to regain control over our interaction. Catherine, your interpretation of these financial records reflects the type of analytical errors that can occur when someone without specialized expertise in portfolio management attempts to evaluate sophisticated investment strategies and market timing decisions. Michael replied with apparent professional authority that barely concealed his panic about the comprehensive scope of my investigation and documentation. This attack on my professional capabilities demonstrated Michael's desperate attempt to undermine the credibility of evidence that clearly established systematic criminal activity through objective financial documentation. His assumption that questioning my analytical skills would create reasonable doubt about criminal evidence revealed his continued underestimation of my professional competence and investigative determination. Your consulting background, while impressive in organizational development, does not provide the specialized knowledge necessary to evaluate complex financial instruments and strategic asset allocation methodologies that characterize advanced portfolio management practices. Michael continued with increasing aggression, masked as professional correction and educational guidance. The condescending tone of this response revealed Michael's desperation to regain psychological dominance and control over our interaction, while demonstrating his persistent belief that manipulation techniques that had previously been successful could overcome comprehensive criminal evidence and external professional validation. Michael, my analysis has been independently verified by certified fraud investigators and forensic accounting professionals who specialize in detecting and documenting financial crimes. I replied with quiet authority that systematically destroyed his attempts to undermine my professional credibility or create doubt about the validity of my evidence. The mention of external professional verification created immediate recognition that his criminal activities had been evaluated by experts whose credentials and analytical capabilities could not be questioned or dismissed through personal attacks or manipulation techniques. His realization that multiple professionals had confirmed criminal activity rather than analytical error eliminated his final defensive strategy and created complete exposure of his systematic theft and fraud. The progression through increasingly desperate defensive strategies had revealed the comprehensive nature of Michael's psychological manipulation, while demonstrating that systematic criminal evidence could not be overcome through deceptive explanations, responsibility shifting, trust violation claims, minimization techniques, or personal attacks on investigative credibility. His recognition that every defensive approach had failed to address overwhelming evidence of systematic theft created desperation that would soon manifest through acknowledgement of criminal activity or complete psychological breakdown, as the reality of his situation became undeniable through continued revelation of comprehensive documentation. Michael's systematic attempts at denial and minimization had failed to address the comprehensive financial documentation I had presented, creating the strategic opportunity to reveal additional evidence that would eliminate any remaining possibility of plausible explanation or successful manipulation. His recognition that casual dismissal and professional justification had proven insufficient against thorough investigation had created desperation that would soon transform into complete acknowledgement of his criminal activities and collaborative deception. The second phase of evidence presentation focused on demonstrating the sophisticated coordination between Michael and Sarah Chen that extended far beyond individual theft to comprehensive criminal enterprise involving systematic client fraud, regulatory violations, and elaborate international escape planning. This documentation would reveal that their collaborative deception represented organized criminal activity rather than impulsive misconduct or temporary ethical lapses. Michael, since you have questioned the accuracy of my financial analysis and suggested that legitimate portfolio management could explain unauthorized transfers and fraudulent credit arrangements, I believe you should review additional documentation that demonstrates the systematic coordination between your activities and those of Sarah Chen at Meridian Investment Partners, I announced while retrieving a second manila folder containing evidence of their collaborative criminal enterprise. The mention of Sarah Chen created immediate physical reaction that revealed Michael's recognition that his romantic relationship and professional collaboration had been discovered and documented alongside his systematic theft of our shared assets. His confident denial of individual misconduct collapsed into panicked concern about exposure of collaborative criminal activities that would carry significantly more severe legal consequences. The evidence I presented included detailed communication records that demonstrated extensive coordination regarding travel arrangements, asset liquidation strategies, and comprehensive planning for international relocation using funds systematically stolen from client accounts and our shared financial arrangements. The sophistication of their collaborative deception exceeded the scope of individual theft to constitute organized criminal enterprise with federal jurisdiction and substantial prison sentences. These email communications between you and Sarah Chen show systematic coordination regarding travel to New York City, Atlantic City, and the Bahamas during periods when you claimed to be conducting individual client meetings or attending professional conferences. I explained while placing printed correspondence that eliminated any possibility that their relationship represented casual personal involvement or coincidental professional collaboration. The communication records revealed intimate personal planning alongside detailed financial strategies that demonstrated comprehensive romantic partnership dedicated to systematic theft and elaborate escape planning. Their correspondence included specific discussions about liquidating client assets, establishing offshore accounts, and coordinating visa applications for permanent relocation to Singapore, where they believed they could avoid accountability for their criminal activities. Additionally, these communications reveal that Sarah Chen has been providing professional expertise and personal support for systematically stealing from your client accounts at Meridian Investment Partners, while coordinating the theft of our shared assets to finance your collaborative relocation and establishment of new professional identities. I continued while observing Michael's growing recognition that both individual and collaborative criminal activities had been comprehensively documented. The client theft documentation included detailed records of unauthorized trading activities, excessive fee structures, and intentional misrepresentation of investment performance that violated federal securities regulations and fiduciary responsibility requirements. Michael had been systematically stealing from retirement accounts and educational savings plans, while using his professional position to conceal losses through fraudulent reporting and misleading client communications. The evidence shows that your systematic theft extends beyond our shared marital assets to include more than $400,000 stolen from client accounts through unauthorized trading, fictitious fee arrangements, and deliberate misrepresentation of investment performance and risk characteristics. I explained while presenting comprehensive documentation that established federal criminal violations with mandatory minimum prison sentences. This revelation transformed the scope of Michael's criminal liability from civil asset recovery to serious federal charges that would result in permanent destruction of his professional reputation and substantial incarceration, regardless of any cooperation or plea arrangement possibilities. His recognition that client theft had been discovered alongside marital asset manipulation created complete panic about the comprehensive consequences for his freedom and future opportunities. The communication records also revealed that Michael and Sarah had been systematically preparing for permanent departure from their current professional and personal obligations for more than 18 months, during which time they had maintained normal routines with spouses and colleagues, while privately liquidating assets and establishing international financial arrangements. Furthermore, the evidence demonstrates that Sarah Chen has been conducting similar systematic theft from her own client accounts while coordinating with you to establish offshore banking relationships and employment arrangements that would enable permanent escape from United States jurisdiction and regulatory authority. I continued while expanding the scope of documented criminal enterprise to include comprehensive international fraud and asset concealment strategies. The offshore banking documentation included detailed records of account establishment in Singapore, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands using false information and fraudulent documentation to conceal the stolen nature of transferred assets. These international financial arrangements represented additional federal crimes related to money laundering and tax evasion that would trigger cooperation requirements with international law enforcement agencies. Michael's recognition that both domestic and international criminal activities had been discovered created desperate acknowledgement that his carefully constructed escape plans had been comprehensively penetrated and documented by someone he had systematically underestimated and dismissed as incapable of sophisticated investigation or strategic response to comprehensive betrayal. The coordination between your activities and Sarah Chen's systematic client theft demonstrates organized criminal enterprise that extends beyond individual misconduct to collaborative fraud involving multiple victims and comprehensive violation of federal securities regulations and fiduciary responsibility standards. I explained while establishing the legal framework that would govern criminal prosecution and asset recovery proceedings. The organized crime classification created additional legal consequences, including extended prison sentences, comprehensive asset forfeiture, and permanent prohibition from financial services employment that would eliminate any possibility of successful relocation or career reconstruction, regardless of international escape attempts or identity falsification strategies. The third phase of evidence presentation focused on demonstrating that Michael and Sarah's systematic criminal activities had been conducted with sophisticated understanding of regulatory requirements and legal boundaries, eliminating any possibility that their theft and fraud could be characterized as inadvertent mistakes or insufficient professional knowledge rather than deliberate criminal intent. These regulatory compliance documents show that both you and Sarah Chen have received extensive training regarding fiduciary responsibilities, client asset protection, and securities regulation requirements that specifically address the types of unauthorized activities you have been conducting systematically. I continued while presenting evidence that established criminal intent rather than professional incompetence or inadequate regulatory knowledge. The compliance training records demonstrated that Michael and Sarah possessed detailed understanding of the criminal nature of their activities while choosing to pursue systematic theft and fraud, despite comprehensive knowledge of legal consequences and professional obligations. Their sophisticated violation of known regulatory requirements eliminated any possibility of claiming ignorance or misunderstanding as mitigating factors. Additionally, the evidence shows that you have been systematically falsifying client communications and investment performance reports to conceal unauthorized trading losses while misappropriating funds for personal use and romantic relationship expenses. I explained while presenting documentation that established comprehensive fraud involving systematic deception of multiple victims over extended periods. The falsified reporting documentation revealed sophisticated strategies for concealing criminal activities through misleading performance calculations, selective disclosure of information, and deliberate misrepresentation of market conditions and investment strategy effectiveness. These deceptive practices demonstrated professional sophistication applied to criminal purposes rather than legitimate client service or ethical investment management. The fourth phase of evidence presentation addressed Michael's specific claims about legitimate portfolio management and professional pressures, by demonstrating that his systematic theft had occurred during periods of exceptional professional success and positive market conditions that eliminated any justification based on performance pressure or client demand management challenges. Your professional performance evaluations during the period of systematic theft show consistently superior ratings and substantial bonus compensation that contradict any claims about professional pressure or financial necessity that might explain unauthorized client asset manipulation. I continued while eliminating potential mitigation arguments based on workplace stress or financial difficulties. The performance documentation revealed that Michael had been conducting systematic theft while receiving recognition for exceptional professional achievement and substantial financial rewards that made personal financial pressure implausible as motivation for criminal activity. His systematic theft represented greed and criminal intent rather than desperate response to professional or personal financial challenges. Furthermore, market performance analysis during the period of your systematic criminal activities shows positive returns that would have generated legitimate compensation sufficient to support comfortable lifestyle without requiring theft or fraudulent manipulation of client and personal assets. I explained while demonstrating that external market conditions provided no justification for criminal behavior or unauthorized asset manipulation. The market analysis eliminated any possibility that professional pressure or challenging economic conditions could explain Michael's systematic theft and fraud. His criminal activities occurred during favorable market conditions that provided abundant opportunities for legitimate financial success without requiring violation of professional ethics or legal standards. The fifth phase of evidence presentation revealed that Michael and Sarah's escape planning included comprehensive strategies for avoiding accountability through identity falsification and permanent international relocation that demonstrated sophisticated criminal intent and complete disregard for victim compensation or legal responsibility. The documentation shows that you and Sarah Chen have been systematically preparing false identification documents and employment verification materials to support permanent relocation to Singapore, using identities that would prevent detection of your criminal activities and avoid accountability to your victims. I continued while presenting evidence of identity fraud and international escape planning. The identity falsification documentation included detailed records of document preparation, employment reference fabrication, and visa application strategies that represented additional federal crimes while demonstrating complete commitment to avoiding accountability rather than accepting responsibility or providing victim compensation. Additionally, the evidence reveals that your relocation planning includes comprehensive asset concealment strategies designed to prevent recovery of stolen funds by victims or regulatory authorities through domestic or international legal proceedings. I explained while demonstrating that their escape planning prioritized criminal benefit preservation over victim compensation or legal compliance. The asset concealment strategies included sophisticated understanding of international banking regulations and legal cooperation agreements that suggested consultation with criminal defense attorneys and financial crime specialists rather than legitimate relocation planning or career advancement preparation. The comprehensive scope of evidence I had presented eliminated every potential explanation or justification that Michael had attempted to construct for his systematic theft and collaborative fraud. The documentation demonstrated organized criminal enterprise with sophisticated planning, comprehensive victim deception, and elaborate escape strategies that exceeded individual misconduct to constitute serious federal crimes with substantial mandatory prison sentences. Michael's recognition that his criminal activities had been comprehensively documented and independently verified created complete collapse of his confident deception management and strategic manipulation techniques. His realization that casual denial and professional justification had proven inadequate against thorough investigation and expert analysis eliminated his remaining options for avoiding accountability or maintaining his fabricated Singapore escape plans. The building evidence had achieved its strategic objective of demonstrating that Michael's systematic theft represented sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than individual mistake or temporary ethical lapse, while establishing comprehensive legal foundation for criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery that would ensure complete accountability for his betrayal and theft. The comprehensive financial evidence and collaborative criminal documentation I had presented created the foundation for revealing the most devastating aspect of my investigation: independent professional verification and federal regulatory attention that had been generated through my systematic documentation of Michael and Sarah Chen's criminal enterprise. This external validation would eliminate any remaining possibility that my evidence could be characterized as personal interpretation or analytical error, while establishing that their criminal activities had attracted official attention from multiple regulatory and law enforcement agencies. Michael's desperate attempts at denial and minimization had consistently underestimated the scope and sophistication of my investigation, while failing to recognize that comprehensive criminal documentation inevitably attracts professional attention from authorities who specialize in detecting and prosecuting financial crimes. His assumption that marital privacy would prevent external involvement had been fundamentally incorrect regarding criminal activities that violated federal regulations and affected multiple victims across state boundaries. Michael, since you have consistently questioned the accuracy of my analysis and suggested that legitimate professional activities could explain systematic theft and fraudulent manipulation of client and personal assets, I believe you should understand that my investigation findings have been independently verified by certified fraud investigators and forensic accounting professionals who specialize in financial crime detection and prosecution support. I announced while observing his immediate recognition that casual dismissal would be insufficient to address external professional value. The mention of independent verification created profound anxiety in Michael's demeanor, as he realized that his criminal activities had been evaluated by experts whose credentials and analytical capabilities could not be questioned through personal attacks or manipulation techniques. His recognition that multiple professionals had confirmed systematic criminal activity rather than analytical misunderstanding eliminated his remaining defensive strategies and created panic about the comprehensive consequences for his freedom and professional future. The external validation process had begun 3 months earlier, when the scope and sophistication of Michael and Sarah's criminal activities exceeded my individual analytical capabilities and required specialized expertise in federal securities regulations, international banking fraud, and organized criminal enterprise investigation. My professional background in organizational consulting had provided the foundation for identifying systematic deception, but comprehensive criminal prosecution required collaboration with professionals who possess specialized knowledge and official authority. Dr. Patricia Williamson from the Certified Fraud Examiners Association has conducted comprehensive analysis of the financial documentation and communication records I compiled during my investigation, and her formal assessment confirms systematic violation of federal securities regulations, fiduciary responsibility standards, and criminal statutes governing financial fraud and asset manipulation. I continued while placing official letterhead documentation that established independent expert confirmation of criminal activity. Dr. Williamson's analysis had provided detailed evaluation of Michael and Sarah's systematic theft using professional methodologies that exceeded academic or consulting analytical standards to meet judicial and regulatory requirements for criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery proceedings. Her formal report had been specifically structured to support federal criminal charges while providing comprehensive documentation for asset forfeiture and victim compensation processes. The independent forensic analysis had revealed that Michael and Sarah's criminal activities represented sophisticated understanding of regulatory boundaries and systematic exploitation of professional positions to conduct comprehensive fraud that affected more than 30 individual victims and multiple institutional clients across several states. The scope of their criminal enterprise had exceeded state jurisdiction to require federal investigation and prosecution under organized crime statutes. Furthermore, the Securities and Exchange Commission has been notified regarding systematic violations of federal securities regulations and fiduciary responsibility standards that have been occurring at Meridian Investment Partners under the supervision and direct participation of both you and Sarah Chen. I explained while presenting official correspondence that demonstrated federal regulatory attention and investigation initiation. The SEC notification had been required by professional ethical standards and regulatory reporting requirements once the scope of systematic client fraud had been established through independent verification and expert analysis. The federal regulatory investigation would inevitably result in comprehensive examination of all client accounts and trading activities at Meridian Investment Partners, while triggering parallel criminal investigation by federal law enforcement agencies. Michael's recognition that federal regulatory authorities had been officially notified created complete panic, as he realized that his criminal activities had transcended personal relationship conflict to attract official attention from agencies with subpoena power and criminal prosecution authority. His carefully constructed escape timeline had been eliminated by regulatory investigation procedures that would prevent international travel and asset transfer pending resolution of criminal charges and civil liability proceedings. The regulatory investigation had also revealed that several other Meridian Investment Partners employees had reported suspicious trading activities and client communication irregularities involving Michael and Sarah Chen to firm compliance officers who had failed to conduct adequate investigation or reporting to appropriate regulatory authorities. The firm's inadequate response to employee concerns had created institutional liability and regulatory violations that would result in comprehensive sanctions and potential criminal charges for supervisory personnel. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has initiated preliminary investigation regarding systematic financial fraud, interstate transportation of stolen assets, and organized criminal enterprise involving systematic violation of federal banking and securities regulations. I continued while presenting documentation that established criminal law enforcement attention alongside regulatory investigation procedures. The FBI investigation had been triggered by cross-referencing multiple victim reports and regulatory violations that revealed patterns of systematic fraud extending across state boundaries and involving international asset transfer activities that required federal law enforcement coordination and prosecution. The organized crime classification had elevated Michael and Sarah's criminal activities to priority investigation status with substantial resource allocation and comprehensive evidence-gathering capabilities. Michael's realization that federal criminal investigation had been initiated created desperate recognition that his Singapore relocation plans had become impossible due to travel restrictions and asset freezing procedures that accompanied federal criminal investigation initiation. His confidence in international escape had been eliminated by regulatory and law enforcement coordination that would prevent asset transfer and ensure comprehensive prosecution regardless of cooperation or plea negotiation attempts. The federal investigation had also revealed that Michael and Sarah's international banking arrangements violated federal money laundering statutes and tax evasion regulations that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences and comprehensive asset forfeiture requirements. Their sophisticated asset concealment strategies had created additional criminal liability, rather than providing protection from domestic law enforcement and regulatory authority. Additionally, the Internal Revenue Service has initiated comprehensive audit and criminal investigation procedures regarding systematic underreporting of income, fraudulent tax deduction claims, and violation of international banking disclosure requirements that represent additional federal criminal violations with substantial penalties and mandatory prosecution requirements. I explained while expanding the scope of federal attention to include tax crimes alongside securities fraud and organized criminal enterprise charges. The IRS investigation had been automatically triggered by cross-agency information sharing protocols that identified discrepancies between reported income and documented lifestyle expenses that suggested systematic tax evasion and unreported income from criminal activities. The tax crime charges would result in additional prison sentences and civil penalties that would ensure comprehensive accountability even if plea arrangements reduce securities fraud or organized crime sentences. The international banking disclosure violations had created particularly serious criminal liability because Michael and Sarah's offshore account arrangements had been established using false information and fraudulent documentation, while failing to comply with federal reporting requirements that carried criminal penalties regardless of underlying asset legitimacy or tax compliance status. The investigation has also revealed that your systematic criminal activities have attracted attention from Singapore financial regulatory authorities, who have been notified regarding fraudulent visa applications and employment documentation that would prevent any possibility of international relocation or career reconstruction through overseas employment opportunities. I continued while demonstrating that international escape had been eliminated through regulatory cooperation and information sharing agreements. The Singapore regulatory notification had been initiated through international cooperation protocols that shared information regarding financial crime investigations and regulatory violations that could affect employment eligibility and professional licensing requirements. Michael and Sarah's fabricated employment arrangements had been exposed as fraudulent through background verification procedures that revealed their involvement in federal criminal investigation and regulatory sanctions. The international regulatory attention had also triggered comprehensive review of their visa applications and supporting documentation that revealed systematic falsification and identity misrepresentation that violated immigration laws and international cooperation agreements regarding financial crime prevention and asset recovery assistance. Furthermore, the investigation has identified additional victims of your systematic criminal activities who have been contacted by federal authorities and provided with information regarding asset recovery procedures and victim compensation programs that will ensure comprehensive restitution regardless of your ability or willingness to provide voluntary compensation. I explained while establishing that victim identification and compensation would proceed independently of Michael's cooperation or acknowledgement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.